Hi guys, here with day 7 of our econ stuff. Starting you off here with a quick daily blog. Go ahead and take a look at the screen and um, take a shot at it. Pause the video and take a shot at it. Okay, so as we practiced the other day here, we got to figure out first what our maximum things that we can produce are. Okay, so I've got 15 Hummers or 5 windmills. Okay, so it's asking us to obviously draw this on what we call a production possibilities curve. So I'm going to put Hummers on one axis and windmills on the other. Okay, you should start with that. I go back, I check, okay, I got 15 Hummers. Okay, so I'm going to label Hummers 15 and windmills 5. All right, hopefully your handwriting's better than mine. I apologize. And then I just got to connect these dots. All right, there's my production possibilities curve. Now, the next question is that it asks us to what is the cost in windmills of producing one extra Hummer? Okay, so I got to get Hummers by itself. Okay, I got to get one Hummer. All right, so if you remember, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a simple math equation. We're going to go 15 H equals 5 windmills. Okay, so what am I solving for again? For number 2, I'm solving for H. Okay, so I'm going to divide by 15. Divide by 15. 1 Hummer equals 1/3 of a windmill. Okay, pretty straightforward. Let's flip it. Let's solve it for windmills here. So if I'm going to produce one more windmill, again, I'm going to start out. I'll just start out the long way. 5 windmills, 15 Hummers, and now I got to solve for W. Divide by 5. Divide by 5. 1 windmill equals 3 Hummers. Last part of the question. It's asking us, okay, if new technology is created to produce Hummers faster, what's our new curve going to do? First of all, it doesn't say anything about windmills, so we're only going to shift out one side of this line. It's going to look something like that. Okay, and again, hopefully your handwriting is a little bit better than mine. This line should be straight. Okay, hopefully that works for you. We're moving on to a new chapter today. It is in reference to what are referred to as economic systems. So your second daily blog is starting off right here, right off the bat. Go ahead and take a look at it. It's asking you what do you think rules are fair in the United States economy, and also what is a rule that is unfair. There's no right or wrong answers. And then last, are people able to take advantage of those rules? Okay. So anyway, get that written down. You'll want to, as you are doing this, okay, reference the notes that I placed on that I linked you to. Okay, the chapter 2 notes. They look like this. We're going to do the front side today. Obviously, we're filling out we're filling out a chart, which is a little bit different than what we did before. So make sure you follow along and you're filling out what needs to be filled out. I'll kind of help you along the way with it early on. Okay, so. First things first, okay, an economic system, you're defining that. Go ahead and write that at the top of your notes, okay? So an economic system is simply really how, we talk about how we make decisions, right? Individually as well. We analyze the cost of benefits, what's best for us, what are we going to do? Well, entire economies need to do the same thing. And they kind of make the decisions very similar to how we do. Now, you're never going to satisfy everybody, but governments and societies face, 3 very basic questions, basically the same questions that you and I would face. All right. So again, you're writing these next 3 questions right across the top here. So what should be produced? How should it be produced? And who and for whom should it be produced? And you'll see those as we go along. Okay. So you're writing those down. We're going to answer those for each different type of economy as we go here. Okay, so first we gotta figure out what we're going to produce. Some countries are limited. Japan, for example, very, very small land-wise, okay, but a whole lot of people, so they don't have a whole lot of space. Agriculture, not necessarily something Japan focuses on, right? They focus on the fishing industry. They're also going to focus on, electronics, right? Electronics don't take up tons of space. They've gotten very good at that. Okay, so other times countries are going to be limited by how educated their workforce is, how talented is their workforce. Poorer countries tend to have much less, availability to big machines that do a whole lot of work. Okay, so obviously climates are going to play a role too, and what countries can grow. The United States is in the example of we can produce kind of whatever, right? We have a talented workforce. We have all sorts of different climates. We have all sorts of different land, all sorts of different resources. We're in a pretty good spot. Okay. The next thing we got to figure out is how it should be produced. Okay. So in the case of the United States, the government, for the most part, kind of stays out of our way. Okay. They don't really tell us what to do. They try to influence us to do certain things. Sometimes they offer subsidies to produce certain things. But for the most part, historically, the United States basically stays out of our way. Contrast that with someone like communism, where the government, or at least Soviet Union communism, where the government is constantly overseeing everything each producer does. Um, you know, we leave it up to private citizens for the most part. Okay. And then the last thing we got to figure out is who gets what. So when we figure out who gets what, in the United States, it's simple. We just figure out who can pay for it, right? I have to afford it. I have to be able to afford it, which there's some challenges to that, right? There's some people that are in disadvantages as you go through and look at some of the challenges our country has. On the flip side, if a government's going to decide who gets what, we distribute that stuff evenly. That occurs. That occurs. That could be the other extreme as far as that. Okay, so just kind of take a mental picture of this diagram here, okay? And if you want to draw it out, by all means, draw it out. But this is referred to as the circular flow of income, okay, and output. And so, an economy, in the sense that what occurs, is pretty simple. Individuals create businesses or work for businesses, and they're trying to buy and sell their goods, or I'm trying to sell my labor, right? There's a reason why the school pays me an income. I'm selling my labor, okay? Um, and obviously that creates money flow through the economy. Pretty simple to understand that. Okay, when the school pays me and I go get my car fixed, well, that's creating an income from someone else. So that's how money flows through. We want that to happen as much as possible. Now, the government also can influence how much money flows. So the government can give us money. If you've been paying attention to the unemployment stimulus from that has just recently expired. The government was giving people extra money to be able to spend at businesses, right? And the government can also take money out of our pockets by taxing us. Same thing goes for businesses. The government provides certain benefits to businesses that can be, certain protections, as far as, environmental protections, or even as simple as building roads, where now I can transport my goods and services as a business, and businesses also pay taxes. So the government affects how much money we have to spend too. Okay, and so we want that to happen as much as possible. We're going to talk about the history of how economies have evolved over time. Okay, so if we go back, let me double check here and show you that so here's where we're at. Okay, so you're filling out this traditional economies part. Okay, and you're going to fill out these questions. You'll see, all right, this chart follows is the same exact thing. Okay, so we start out with what are referred to as traditional economies, and this is kind of when society starts. When we say society, remember, we're talking about people basically starting to live together. Okay, and whether it's a real small group or a real big group. A great example of traditional economies were Native Americans. And again, those of you that are familiar with Native Americans, they focus first on things that are needed. What do we need to produce on a day-to-day basis to survive, right? So whether that's food, shelter, clothing, the general stereotype of a Native American community would be the males are the hunters and gatherers, the females are kind of the males are the hunters. The females might gather food like fruit and stuff like that, vegetables, and they also take care of the household, right? They take care of the kids. They probably make sure that the clothes are made, those types of things. And for the most part, Native American societies were pretty successful. So why would they change, right? So they did things the way they were always done. And communities took care of themselves. Okay, so who got what? Well, it was people that needed it. Okay, and on small societies, in smaller groups of people, that works pretty well. When we get to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people, that hasn't necessarily been successful yet. But either way, okay, that is how things started off. Advantages: We worked together. Native Americans were, like we said, very successful and able to, basically build, in some cases, empires that were the size of basically Central America, which we'll get to in a second. Now, if we talk about this economy today, we wouldn't be impressed by it, right? We like to earn more stuff. We like to be entertained more. We want to do more stuff, and we wouldn't necessarily love living in this economy today. Most of us. I mean, there's some parts of it that would probably be refreshing, but at the same time, this isn't necessarily what we used to. Okay, I list your examples that I mentioned as we went on. Now, as time went on into the mid like 1400s, 1500s, well, we see these societies get real successful, and we start seeing these empires like the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, and all of a sudden, like we had these small groups of people with Native American tribes we had these small groups of people with Native American tribes, and well, how did they do things in the past? Well, they decided that they were going to have a chief, and they have small family structures, and were in those situations where this council of elders. And so, since they had those that system in place and it was successful, they said, okay, well, let's just do it on a big stage. Okay, so let's have these tens of thousands of people we have probably referred to as a king, right? And this king's gonna tell different groups of people what to do. Okay, if you get into like even medieval times, you've got the king, then you've got his noblemen, right? The rich, and then the noblemen are kind of in charge of the peasants. And so the government's deciding where you fall in that scale in that caste system, okay, in that class system. So anyway, obviously, if you're at the top, things are good. If you're at the bottom, things are bad. You can't get yourself any better. If you're a peasant, you're gonna stay a peasant. And again, in the case of, we talk about like people who lead us. Well, we don't really choose the leader, right? Leaders are born, not necessarily elected. Modern day examples, not quite necessarily a king, but a dictator. This is Kim Jong Un. He's in charge of North Korea. China is another example of a very communist, very socialist economy. Notice too, we also refer to it as a command economy. Think about it as a dictator. We use the example of a king, and you can see the advantages and disadvantages, right? More equal distribution rather than like the reward of capitalism. So obviously, eventually we mentioned the kings. Eventually, we get to the 1700s, and people start getting mad about this king, and we say, hey, having a king is not necessarily the best thing for an economy. And so the United States, well, the soon-to-be United States, comes up with this idea of capitalism, where now we're going to leave private individuals um, up to decide for what's going to be produced. We can set prices. The reward is going to be a profit. The challenges are now, though, that people that need stuff, that can't take it, that can't earn for themselves, they are going to struggle. Okay, but the idea is in the early stages was, well, you better figure out how to get it done. Well, obviously, that isn't necessarily the perfect way of thinking, and you can kind of see the advantages, the freedom to own property, expand on that property, make a profit. The disadvantages, the government won't support people. Again, in this pure capitalist idea, won't support people that cannot support themselves. That would be left up to their family members. Notice my example, United States pre-1900s. Okay, so those of you that have taken U.S. history, you know that in the 1920s we went through this progressive movement, and it wasn't just in the 20s, but in the early 1910s and 20s, and even a little bit before 1900s, we start getting these ideas that say, hey, listen, these monopolies are forming. Big, huge companies are polluting a whole bunch. Big, huge companies are taking advantage of consumers. You may remember reading the book The Jungle about the meatpacking industry. And so the government starts saying, hey, listen, let's try to get into and be like a referee. Okay. And so they start making certain rules that are meant to level the playing field. Okay. And so they start, saying, hey, listen, you can't pollute, and we're going to start making sure you don't pollute as much. Or, hey, you're a big, huge monopoly and you're just working together. Hey, we're going to break you up. You need to compete against each other. And so Every economy in the world is trying to find this perfect balance of a referee, right? We've all been to, those of you that watch sports, you've all witnessed a game where you thought the refs were bad. Maybe you thought the refs were bad because they called way too many fouls or made way too many rules. Well, that's no fun to watch because the game never occurs, right? Maybe you were watching a game and there was no calls made, right? Well, now that's no good because now no one can score because the defense has no rules against them and they're taking advantage of the situation. Okay, so in actuality, every economy in the world, even North Korea, is some level of mixed. Okay, we have some government intervention with some socialism policies. Okay, and then we have some, economic freedom with some capitalist policies. We're trying to mix those together, and it's basically constantly evolving. Okay, and again, kind of depending on what the economy does is is going to influence what politicians try to do. Okay, we're going to finish those notes on day 8. Okay, those of you keeping up with the day-to-day stuff, you will also see the link of this communism failure assignment. Okay, so you're going to read through that, and the reason I'm having you read it is because a lot of times people might think, communism doesn't look horrible on paper, right? In some cases, it sounds good. People work together. Things were real bad. The economy was really poor in the first place. Hey, if everyone works together, everybody gets what they need. This kind of explains it in an economic way that of how communism failed in the Soviet Union back in the late 80s and early 90s. Okay, so you'll see that. Make sure you're staying on top of it. Turn it in on Google Classroom for you virtual people. You hybrid people, by all means, you can bring in a hard copy, do one or the other. Okay, we will talk again soon.